Hey, it's Francis Lamb, host of The Splendid Table. Every week on our show, we talk about food and cooking and the meanings of food and cooking. We talk with the most interesting people in food about their techniques, their culture, and everything in between. Whether it's about how fried chicken took over the world or how Instagram changes the way people are actually eating. It's a food show where everyone is welcome. Come join us. You can listen to The Splendid Table wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Westholme is working with the land to create nature-led Australian Wagyu. Westholme believes that when nature leads, flavor follows. Learn more at westholme.com.
Good morning, everybody. This is Amuse News, your destination for food news and conversation. If you like what you hear or see or both, share with your friends. Subscribe to the podcast. Leave us a review. I'm your host, RJ, and I'm here to go on an adventure through the food world, hopefully with you all. So thanks for joining. It's Friday. Hope everyone has a good Memorial Day weekend planned. Today, I'm going to be talking to Jess Gingrich, one of our awesome interns, who worked on a story about Pralines, produced this episode about Pralines that was featured on the most recent episode of Meat and Three. So looking forward to chatting with Jess in a minute. Just want to tell you a few things. Also, as usual, if you see things out there you think we should be talking about, let me know. Let me know what we're missing or what we should be covering here. Because trying to cover it all. Okay, first, America's Test Kitchen. They have a podcast called Proof, and they just started a special season called 100 Proof. This series is about the history of cocktails. The first episode, which is live now, it's pretty interesting. I didn't know a lot of the history of cocktails, particularly how cocktails were seen before World War II and in the early part of the century, how cinema and TV kind of changed cocktails, how they changed after World War II and into the 80s and 90s, and kind of the modern cocktail. Also, just how bars and restaurants kind of were part of this, search for the third place outside of home and work, and how cocktail bars and restaurants kind of adapted to help provide that kind of place for people. And they've profiled a bunch of bartenders in New York. It's a really great series and really fun episode. Another thing I was listening to this week, The Food Chain, which is a BBC podcast, their host, Ruth Alexander, was exploring the origins and evolution of the burrito. And they talked to a bunch of different restaurateurs and vendors. They go to Mexico, in the US, and it's funny to hear Brits talk about burritos, I think. But for me, burrito is one of my favorite food. But there's sort of like a controversial take on the origins of the burrito. Some Mexican food purists dislike burritos. What's the future of burritos? It's pretty interesting and a fun listen. And I always like to check out The Food Chain from BBC. Following up on a conversation we had a few weeks ago about the water situation in Mexico and how that affected the brewing industry. If you remember, I talked to a reporter who wrote a piece on that was nominated for a James Beard Media Award. I just saw something in Grist published yesterday about Mexico City and Bogota and other cities in the region are staring down what they're calling Day Zero, which is basically the day that they think that they can make it to in terms of water. And so with the climate the way it is and the season that we have that forecasted ahead, there's a lot of people thinking about and trying to solve these water crises, particularly in the southern hemisphere. And it's a pretty crazy story. I'll put the link in the show notes, as always, to everything. They also talk about South Africa and drought there. So it's really pretty interesting, and hopefully some of these solutions that are being proposed will lead to some relief or some kind of resolution, at least in the short term. Long term, I don't know. I don't have the time or intelligence to figure that out. Okay, last thing, Switched on Pop, which is a pop music podcast from Vox. They partnered up with Gastropod to talk about jingles. I mentioned this briefly in the episode yesterday, but there is the title of the episode is called "Is Pop Music Just Fast Food?" And it's really fun. They go through some iconic food jingles: Taco Bell, Popeyes, Chili's. Most of them, 80s, 90s, and current era. But it's interesting because they tell stories behind a bunch of these songs and the way that fast food production and pop music production move in parallel, which I thought was fairly interesting. With technology and everything else, how pop music is a little bit of more of an assembly line than it used to be, and the same thing with some of the food. So you'll hear a remix of the Chili's Baby Back Ribs song, which has an interesting history. So it's a fun listen, but also kind of opens your eyes maybe a little bit to how music production changes and how food production has been changing alongside that. Okay, so that's the news for now. I want to tell you quickly that next week I have a bunch of awesome guests. Next Tuesday, I'm going to be in New York City at a restaurant called Inde. I'm going to be talking to Farmer's Fridge next Thursday. If you don't know Farmer's Fridge, check them out. They have an interesting product, interesting story. And then next Friday, I'm going to be talking to Mark Bittman of the Bittman Project. So next week, we have an awesome group of guests lined up. And I pretty much have guests booked for the next several weeks, which is really fun. We're in our 22nd episode today. So appreciate you guys supporting us. And as always, please share the show with people you think might be interested. Okay. So for those of you listening, we're going to take a quick break, and then I'm going to bring Jess in. For those of you watching, the break will be even shorter.
Whether you're a chef or just love going to restaurants, you know the best ingredients are everything, especially when it comes to beef. In Northern Australia, there's a different approach to raising high-quality beef. Westholme, based in Queensland and Northern Territory, is working with the land to create nature-led Australian Wagyu. Westholme stewards 16 million acres of rangeland, guided by their natural ecosystems. They're led by a belief that if they balance the needs of their cattle with the needs of the environment, both can thrive. Westholme's team of rangeland experts and nature managers use a variety of tools to monitor and respond to the welfare of the environment, like satellites that address grass health and on-the-ground research. Cattle are happier when they have the freedom to forage and explore, so Westholme ensures that they can roam wild, foraging at will for the first 2 to 3 years of their lives. Their cows graze on native grasses like Mitchell grass, which is only found in Australia, along with dozens of other plants, herbs, and seasonal legumes. The result is a high-quality Wagyu beef that reflects the terroir of Northern Australia and a flavor suited to complement any cuisine. Westholme believes that when nature leads, flavor follows. Learn more at westholme.com.
All right. I'm going to bring Jessica Gingrich into the story here and hear her story. Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for joining. I have a bunch of questions for you about this podcast episode that came out on Meat and Three about pralines, and I want to talk to you about that because not only do I think the story is super interesting and moving, but it also is a good way to kind of explain what, some of what we do at Heritage Radio Network and how this internship program really works. And some of the stuff you all have been doing for the past several months. I've said it a bunch of times on this show, but really impressive and really cool to see the deep dive you all are doing into food. So thank you for all your hard work.
Yeah, I mean, it's been an incredible experience, so I'm more than happy to talk about it.
What I guess you kind of know this, or I kind of know this, but what brought you to HRN?
So I have been a food writer and food journalist for several years, and I was really interested in trying out a different medium. And so HRN not only aligned with, my values in terms of like food justice, in-depth storytelling, and just kind of looking at the food world through unexplored angles, highlighting diverse voices. So all of that, but it gave me the opportunity to learn more about audio storytelling, which I have come to absolutely adore.
That's great. One of the things that I've been able to drop in on a few, not as many as I should, but a few of the meetings, and every week there's a almost like 2.5 hour meeting where you all discuss story ideas and talk about the process and all that. I was lucky to be on the call when you first pitched this idea and the idea of the story of Pralines. And I think it was interesting that it seemed like you had been kind of like thinking about this for a long time, and it was like a very emotional conversation, because I think this is something that's like clearly near and dear to your heart. And it was really cool to watch the team kind of, coalesce around this idea. But tell us, I guess, first, just how this story came to be and your interest and involvement in it.
Yeah. Well, let me just say the team and community at HRN has been incredible and so supportive. And I feel so grateful to have been able to bring this story to life on this platform and with people who were really committed to putting in work and supporting me. And yeah, I just have to say that off the bat. But in terms of the origins of the story, you're right. It has been a long time coming and something that is very near and dear to me. It started a long time ago. So the origins are, I first heard a podcast that came out in 2005, but I don't know, perhaps it was 2019 that I listened to it. It was the Kitchen Sisters, which is a fabulous podcast. And they did an episode on King and his pralines timed around Hurricane Katrina, which, as everybody knows, was horrific for New Orleans, and King was there at the time. And there was something about it that I just couldn't get out of my head, specifically around the dissonance of someone creating something sweet in a place that is so devoid of humanity, I'll just say it, and with roots to, that started as a plantation and still operates on that model. And so this idea of using food in this space to kind of express creativity and resistance just really captivated me. And I knew a bit about the Black Panther Party history, not as much as I know now, but I knew about their free breakfast program and their free grocery program. So I knew there was a food connection there. And the way my brain works is through connections. It's not quite linear, but I saw that there were a lot of interesting things that I wanted to explore. And so I reached out to Robert King, who graciously agreed to speak with me, and it spiraled from there. I learned that the story, literally the least interesting thing about this man is that he made pralines in solitary confinement, which is all you need to know, because that's inherently interesting. But I stumbled into a much bigger story about injustice, about American history, about the prison system. And so it was really important to, and about friendship. I think that that's a really important thing about friendship and love and commitment to principles. But yeah, I think once I realized the scope of what I was dealing with, I knew I had to tackle it all. It would be unfair to just reduce it down to a praline story. And so, I was trying to capture a lot of the complexity and nuance that I found. And I think that audio gave me a platform to do that.
One thing that I found really interesting, and I don't want to talk, explain the whole episode because I want people to listen to it. But one thing that I wanted to ask you about is just this collaborative process of working. Like I mentioned, you were you pitched it kind of to the group on a call that 20 people were on, and it was really a great conversation. But you started with this idea that was kind of your idea, and then made it a well-rounded and entertaining, informative story. And watching that process, I thought was really cool, because you saw people jumping in and saying like, oh, well, here's like a different angle we could talk about, and I think that really kind of exemplifies what we're doing with this program. And I don't know, can you just talk about that process of like going from your perspective on it to like a bigger, broader story?
Yeah, I don't think the perspective and story changed significantly. I think what it was the collaboration, insofar as like I had been thinking about these things for so long that my brain was in a complete knot, and having people to help me tease it out, to develop it further, to add nuance and, as you said, different perspectives in terms of like, this is important to highlight, this is not. I really could not have done it without this collaborative effort. I really want to shout out Taylor Early, H. Conley, Addison Austin Liu, and Hannah Chenard. They knew how important this was to me, and they put everything they had into it, and I'm so grateful. And yeah, it was an incredible experience to have people take, I set up the episode, but to then have them take it and make it their own, and interact with the material in different ways was really magical to see, and brought me so much joy. So yeah. I'm really grateful.
It's awesome. Yeah, the collaboration is great. And we also brought in, you all brought in another HRN host to give some perspective on Pralines, Zella. And there's just, it was interesting because your story, like you said, it could have been its own miniseries, really. But, that is like, there's built all this other context around that story and the interviews that you did. How did the story change as like you said at the beginning, you wanted to kind of get into a different medium or try a different medium? How did the story change from what you were expecting based on, doing it in audio format? So
I think it made it possible, first and foremost.
Right.
The intimacy and immersive experience of audio allowed for a kind of storytelling where I could center this personal story and the voices associated with it, while we also weave in context and go in and out of timelines and still keep people engaged. And as hard as I tried to do that in writing, it just was impossible. So much of the depth in King's voice and Albert's voice, but also in Zella's voice and Kiana's voice, comes from their physical voice. And that is not something that I could replicate. And it was essential, I think, to the story. And yeah, I think the major change was being able to really go in depth in these other stories, really highlight the history of Pralines, through talking with Zella and, her experience making Pralines, to really have a conversation around prison agricultural labor and its connections to slavery, and be able to touch on all of these things while maintaining intimacy, emotion, and yes, we didn't have to sacrifice depth or context, which is my love language. So context is my love language.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that, I've been doing podcasts for a really long time. And I think that intimacy, authenticity, that's probably the two words that are used most frequently to describe the medium overall. And I think at its best, that's what audio provides, and I think it's a really it can allow you to get into things without, like you said, without sacrificing, which is really cool.
Yeah. It was really important for me from the beginning to, I told King that I would do my best to do it right, or else I wouldn't do it at all. And that's, why I put so much work in it, why it took so long, and ultimately why it became audio, is that was the right way to do it. And I firmly believe that.
Can you just tell everyone who King is, just a little bit, like a little short background?
Robert King is a man who lives in New Orleans. His 82nd birthday is in 6 days, May 30th. So he grew up in the Jim Crow South, and he ended up in Angola prison, which at the time was notorious for being the most racist and horrifically violent prison in the United States. This is the 70s. And as I said before, it was a plantation. Its name derived from the homeland of many enslaved Africans, and has had the plantation model throughout its 200-year history. So he, while he was in the New Orleans jail awaiting trial, met members of the Black Panther Party. So in 1970, there were a couple of events. One was the Attica Prison Rebellion, which happened and, catalyzed a prison rights movement throughout the country. The other was, and of course these are intersected, but, these groups like the Black Panther Party, who were pushing for social and societal change, and there was a backlash against them, so that a lot of the members were being arrested, put into the system, and actually that's how the principles and membership of the party spread. And all three, Albert Woodfox, Herman Wallace, and Robert King, all became engaged with the party while in jail, and they became members, adopted the principles, and started actively participating in this larger prison rights movement. Once they got to Angola prison, they fought against the just cruel conditions there, which we can get into. But through work stoppages, petitions, filing lawsuits, hunger strikes, basically anything that they could do. And that made them targets. So they were set up for prison murders, thrown in solitary confinement for decades. And in 2000, the three of them, after 28 years in solitary confinement, the three of them filed a joint lawsuit against the prison for, violating their civil rights, for keeping them in solitary for such a prolonged period of time. And King was released the next year in 2001. He spent the next 15 years campaigning all over the world, yes, to raise awareness of Albert and Herman and the injustice done to them, but also to raise awareness about prolonged solitary confinement, about the negative impacts of solitary confinement, about prison conditions in the United States. And the lawsuit as he's doing all of this, the lawsuit is going through the courts, and the state appealed it over and over and over again, so that it wasn't settled until 2016. And as a consequence, both Herman and Albert were kept in solitary. You'll have to forgive me. I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head. Albert was held, but I think it's important. Albert was held for 44 years and 10 months in solitary confinement. And at the time of his release, he spent the longest time in solitary out of any person in U.S. history. Herman, I think, trying to do some math, I think he spent 41 years in solitary. Please, world, forgive me if I'm wrong. It's around that number. You can look at it. And he was released in 2013, only to die 3 days later. So Robert King has dedicated his entire life to fighting the system that robbed him of his life, of 30 years of his life, that perpetuates injustice after injustice. And he just never stopped. He made a commitment when he left Angola that he might be free of Angola, but they'll never be free of him. And he's lived out that word every day of his life since.
Thanks for sharing all that. And everyone should obviously listen to this full episode. I guess I just have a couple more questions. One, I wanted to ask you what you learned during this process of kind of creating the episode, whether that's on the podcast side or on the story or about the people, whatever comes to mind that you've learned. I'm sure it's a lot.
Yeah. This has been an incredibly eye-opening and rewarding experience from start to end. And I am so profoundly grateful to the people that I've talked to along the way, the people that laid the groundwork in terms of scholarship. The Angolite is a prison newspaper that was produced in Angola. It still is, but they had some incredible coverage, and really they wrote the first story. A man named Lane Nelson wrote the first story about the Angola Three and some other people that were held in prolonged solitary. So I want to give credit where it's due. That my process was very much built on a legacy of knowledge production and protest and getting the word out. And I am eternally grateful because it's changed my life. What I've learned in terms of the last 6 months is I've learned a couple of things. I've learned things about myself, and I've learned things about the craft, and I've learned things about what I want to do. I've learned to trust my voice more and my ideas. I've learned that even if I can't fully articulate things, that I can trust my gut and just pursue them anyway, even if I don't quite know how they're going to turn out and I'm a beginner, and that it'll work out. And I'm really grateful for that. I've learned how much a creative community matters, how much input and emotional and intellectual support, and that any good story, similar to what I was saying, is that this is, built on a legacy of people who came before me. It's also very much built on the people that interacted with me at HRN and built this story with me and told this story with me and shared their ideas and time and energy and knowledge and incredible voices. And so I think, we have this idea that there's the lone story, intellectual storyteller, but I don't think that that's the case. I don't think that you can tell meaningful stories without other people. And I think stories are also what connect us with other people. And so it's kind of a beautiful thing. And so, that's the biggest gift that HRN has given me, is access to people who are brilliant and willing to take creative risks and willing to try different things and play around with narratives and help, and really sit and develop ideas and think through soundscapes. And I've never been in a situation like this before, and it's been the most fulfilling creative experience of my life.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing all that. We appreciate it. My last question is this story over? Like, do you feel like you told the story, or is there more to the story that you want to tell?
I think that I told one part of the story. I think this story contains multitudes. And that, no, I'm not done. And what I will say is that the Angola 3 is a misnomer in a sense, because, so like King likes to say, it's not just the Angola 3, it's Angola 3-3, it's Angola 3-3-3, Angola 3-3-3-3-3. And that's very much true in the sense that, like, these men got a lot of publicity for what they endured and their activism, but they're not the only ones that this happened to, and continues to happen to. And on the flip side of that, they're not the only ones responsible for the movement that happened. There's so many unnamed people that collaborated with them throughout the entire process. And it really was a coalition of many different groups of people, both inside and out. And I think that there's so much nuance here and so many stories worth telling, and I would be grateful to continue to do so.
That's awesome. Thank you. And I want to hear more of your stories, so I hope you keep telling them. And thanks for doing this interview and for putting the episode together.
Of course. Can I tell you one thing?
Yeah, please.
So, because this didn't make it into the podcast, but I think people will find it interesting. So in the civil case, this was in Albert's criminal case. Burl Cain was the warden of the prison. He came on in the 90s and was there, I think, through 2015, and now is in Mississippi. King, because he connected with people like John Connors and different people in government, was able to make a trip back to Angola. And somebody brought a package of the pralines with them and gave them to the warden, who subsequently, in his testimony, said that this was proof that he had not reformed his ways, that he was still a revolutionary agitating for the Black Panther Party because it had a panther on the label. So wow. Food is always political, and that is just crazy. Just wanted to leave with that thought.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing that, and thanks for all this. This is really cool. I mean, what an awesome story, and I'm glad that you were able to help tell it. So thank you.
Thank you so much for everything.
I appreciate it. And thanks everybody for listening. I hope you go check out that episode of Meat and 3. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts or through the link in the show notes. Jess, I'll see you soon, and to everyone else, I'll see you on Tuesday. Have a great long weekend, everybody.
Bye.
cocktails, from the classics to zero-proof drinks, are all around us. But what if we told you that craft cocktails are actually a relatively recent addition to the culinary scene? My name is Toni Tipton-Martin, and I'm the editor-in-chief of Cook's Country at America's Test Kitchen. I want to introduce you to a podcast mini-series I'm hosting called 100 Proof, The Journey of the American Cocktail. Over 6 episodes, we'll look at how mixed drinks offer us a window into what was happening in America during the dawn of the cocktail. We'll then take you to the present day to contemplate what forces led to our modern cocktail renaissance. And along the way, we'll of course be sharing cocktail recipes with you. Subscribe to Proof from America's Test Kitchen so you won't miss the first episode. It drops on Thursday, May 23rd. Again, that's Proof, Proof, from America's Test Kitchen. Cheers.